absence. No apologies for absence. I'm aware that I think 2 members have mentioned to me that they are on their way. We have a quorum, 4 of us being present. So I wish to welcome everyone who's here, members present, the Auditor General and her team, the Ministry of Finance, Ms. Blake and her team, and the Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, and her team, and the personnel from the Caribbean Maritime University. Welcome all. We had attempted to have a previous meeting by way of a video conference. However, the House procedures were not conducive to that, and we have decided instead to proceed in the traditional way by convening an in-person meeting in the chamber of the House, masks and all. Social distancing is being followed. We discourage persons from sitting directly side by side, since there's ample room, to give yourself a bit more space if you so wish. And apart from that, the only other issue is to say that we are here really to deal with one substantive item, which is the Auditor General's report, or department's report, special audit report on the Caribbean Maritime University. You want me to read that into the minutes? Okay. Madam Clerk has suggested that I read into the minutes a protocol, proposed protocol in relation to the use of names that the ministry has supplied in respect of persons or companies that were labeled in the report but not identified by name. And the basic protocol that is being proposed is that any person or individual whose identity is disclosed during the deliberations of the Public Accounts Committee on the Auditor General's report should be afforded the opportunity to come before the PAC to make representations on the matters which concern them in the report, should they wish to do so. That approach commends itself because the Auditor General has indicated that the reason she does not generally disclose identities of persons in her report is that they have not been afforded an opportunity to respond to the contents of the report that relate to them before the report is tabled in Parliament. Our primary duty as members of this committee and as one of the legislature's most important oversight bodies in relation to the executive is to get at the truth and to do what we can to have irregularities and administrative weaknesses corrected. This is one of the main reasons why anything said in our committee is protected by absolute privilege in the law of defamation. This primary duty, which necessitates transparency and accountability, cannot be adequately performed if the identities of companies and individuals referred to in the report are not disclosed to PAC members. However, in doing so, we should also seek to respect the rules of natural justice and fairness as best we can, without compromising our primary duty. The protocol proposed above will ensure that the reputations of companies and individuals referred to in the report will not be prejudiced, without the PAC affording them an opportunity to come before us to try to clear their names if they so wish. And that is the basics for the proposed protocol. Members, can we formally, I'd ask that we formally adopt the protocol as a method of proceeding in keeping with the rules of natural justice and fairness. Thank you. So moved. Seconded. Thank you, Madam Clerk. So that's done. Right. So we have before us the special audit report of the Auditor General on the Caribbean Maritime University. And the forward says it against the background of public concerns regarding allegations of malpractices at the Caribbean Maritime University's CMU, I commissioned a special audit to determine the veracity of the allegations and whether the university had in place an effective governance and monitoring framework with appropriate systems of internal controls. My audit found weaknesses in CMU's governance practices and internal control environment, which were manifested by a lack of financial transparency, breaches of the human resource HR policy, minimal adherence to government guidelines, and limited accountability by CMU's leadership. In some instances, questionable decisions by the president resulted in expenditures that created no apparent value for the university. And the AG goes on to urge the CMU and the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information to seriously consider the recommendations contained in this report to resolve the weaknesses identified, which, if left unresolved, could expose the university to financial losses. Further, CMU and the Ministry should determine whether expenditure specified in the report represents proper charges on the university with a view to recovering said amounts from the officers responsible for the payments made. And the AG thanks the management of the university and the ministry for the courtesies extended to our staff during the execution of the audit. So we have as well the PAC briefing report, otherwise known as the prompt, which we generally use as a guide to how we proceed in these meetings. Okay. So members, I'm going to proceed unless you want to say something, Member Guy?
Chairman, just probably, I don't know if it's housekeeping for CMU. Recently it was reported in the media that there are some changes in terms of leadership at CMU. I think the committee needs to understand or know from CMU who is going to take charge of it, in that there's a new interim president and a new treasurer. And could be advised by the team, the permanent secretary, how we're going to proceed going forward. Is it that the former acting president who is here will continue throughout the deliberations, or that there will be a replacement by the interim president as we get into the further meetings? And what about the treasurer?
Thank you, Member. PS, you've heard Member Guy. We're aware that there have been some changes at the top of the leadership at the CMU recently. We see Professor Ajaguna here, who was, I think, acting as president before the new interim president was appointed. I don't know the date of the appointments of the new, when they take effect and so on, but perhaps you could respond as to who will be primarily responsible for CMU-related responses in the course of our deliberations, both today and if we have any further meetings on this matter.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman, and good morning to the members, as well as my colleagues from the Auditor General Office, as well as the Ministry of Finance. Some changes have been announced for the Caribbean Maritime University. The identified interim president is Professor Evan Dugan, who is expected to take up office on I think it is June 1, which is next week. So Professor Ibrahim will continue to act for this week, hence he's here with us today. The treasurer, Mr. Devon Gardner, he has submitted his resignation, and this was accepted by the university, and so he's no longer with the university, and Miss Joy Patricia Harrison has taken over as treasurer, interim university treasurer. She's not here with us today because she's going through the orientation exercise, and so it will take some time for her to be provided with all the information that is required to speak on the issues relating to CMU. Now, going forward, the council will take a decision as to who will continue to represent CMU at this level, sir.
Thank you, PS. Dr. Guy, that's satisfied with that response?
I heard the response for permanent secretary, but I'm a little concerned. Who, therefore, then will answer questions which I no doubt the members will have as it relates to the finances? Will Professor be the person who will do that? And because it is going to pose a challenge unless we have somebody from that particular area here who would be capable of responding to those questions adequately. It would leave the committee in a quandary, not being able to go forward in respect of certain things. So, hence my concern.
Yes, certainly for today then, if there are issues relating to the accounts and financials of the CMU, who would be answering those questions from within the CMU today? Do we have anybody who can do
Chairman,
that?
we are faced with a little difficult situation today because not only has the treasurer resigned, but the second in command who would have been there during his period, she recently did an operation and she would not be fit to be here with us today. So going forward, we'll have to take a decision guided by the council as to who will continue moving forward. Professor Haberwin will try as best as possible based on the briefing meetings and the discussion that we have had in putting the report together to answer what he can possibly answer. But my own assessment is that going forward, we may need the actual financial person to provide the additional information that the committee will require, sir.
I think so. I mean, having read the report, there are many matters that require answering, which are primarily around financial transactions of one sort or another, procurement and other things. So we would really want the person who is responsible for that function within the entity to be present. Right. Even if they were not on staff at the time, at least they would be in a position to say what they have discovered and so on. And I think it would be difficult for Prof. Adjuguna to be asked to do that, given that that is not his principal responsibility.
So, Chairman, just allow me, sir, to just have the discussion with the Chairman of Council to have that finalized for further sittings. But just to say that in our preparation, we identified specific persons who could speak on different areas. So we have Mr. Cornell Brown, who would be able to speak to the special courses as the VP for Advanced Skills and Professional Development, and Ms. Elaine Hayden will speak on the procurement of the special projects and other strategic initiatives. And we also have Mrs. Andira Harriott, who is responsible for human resources and may be able to speak to some of the HR issues. So we may not be able to address directly the financial issues today, sir, but we will prepare ourselves for the next sitting.
Okay, thank you, PS. Members, unless anybody has any further preliminary matters they wish to raise, I would propose that we go into the prompt and begin the substantive review.
And Mr. Chairman, the prompt we're using is the one that was sent out in March. Is that the current one?
I believe so. I believe it's the one that was sent in March. It is 24 pages long. Okay. So, page 2 of the report speaks to the fact that the audit was undertaken in response to public concerns regarding allegations of malpractices at CMU It sought to assess whether CMU's operational activities, governance, and monitoring frameworks were consistent with the principles of good financial management, whether procurement and contracts management practices were in keeping with the GOJ guidelines and best practices to attain value for money. What we found was poor governance and accounts management, and in particular, infrequent council meetings, inadequate oversight by portfolio ministry. I'm looking at the prompt. Page 3. Page 3. So on page 3, I was just reading the poor governance and accounts management heading, and itemized below it, infrequent meetings, inadequate oversight by the portfolio ministry, transactions not related to CMU's core business. All of those come under poor governance and accounts management. Then there were procurement breaches and contract management, and direct contracting utilized instead of competitive bidding, full value not received for contracts, onerous costs related to contracts. And then under the heading of unsatisfactory HR practices, failure to adhere to HR policy, inconsistent HR practices, unapproved emoluments. And there is a chart on page 4, which is in the form of a circle, a series of circles. In the middle circle, limited oversight by council and portfolio ministries enabled weak reporting systems. The next circle speaks to unsupported payments from 332.9 million Jamaican dollars and 293,445 US dollars. The next circle mentions procurement breaches totaling 217.7 million Jamaican dollars and US $989,485. Then there's weak internal controls, which enabled improper transfers from CMO accounts to an entity called JMIIP, I think. I'm not sure, the print on mine is a little fuzzy there. $145 million. And then breaches of HR policy. Staff engaged without advertising or interviews. Next page raises issue 1. CMU's council failed to implement the required systems to facilitate independent audit reviews. CMU's council did not develop adequate internal controls and did not have in place a functioning audit committee and an internal auditor. This also deprived the council of independent audit assurance to assist in its oversight responsibilities. Additionally, respective portfolio ministries did not undertake any independent audit as part of their governance responsibility. CMU did not faithfully submit minutes of its council meetings, quarterly and half-yearly reports to its portfolio ministry, in keeping with Principle 15 of the Corporate Governance Framework for Public Bodies and the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. We also saw no evidence that the portfolio ministry demanded these reports from council. We have management's response in the prompt. A monitoring system was implemented in May 2019. This includes a checklist which outlines all key areas of governance. A meeting was held last May with the executive management team, as well as members of the previous council, where this was discussed and agreed on. Since then, a compliance audit was done to determine levels of compliance and corrective action. Corrective actions were suggested. Monitoring will continue on an ongoing basis. The Ministry has commenced the collection of board minutes and supporting documentation. To date, minutes for the financial year 2019-2020 have been collected, and a summary has been prepared and submitted to the Minister and new Chairman of Council for further discussion. Quarterly reports for the 2018-19 financial year and the first 3 quarters of the 2019-20 financial year have also been submitted and are being reviewed. Annual reports for 2015-16 through 2018-19 will be submitted by the end of May 2020. The external auditors requested the completion of the Auditor General's report before the annual reports and audited financial statements could have been completed. CMU is to send the external auditors the annual reports. The Director of Marketing and Communication has responsibility for the completion and submission of the reports. The draft annual reports were presented on January 31st, 2020 to the Acting Permanent Secretary for review. An internal auditor from the Ministry is now on secondment to the University until an internal auditor is recruited. The Chief Audit Executive of the parent Ministry is also providing support. The Audit Committee of the Board will be established to provide oversight. The CMU was not audited by the Ministry in 2018, as that was the year that the Ministry took responsibility. In 2019, the audit team could not have conducted any audits, as a number of other audits by external entities were taking place. So that is the management response, and it is marked as a matter to keep in view. Has an internal auditor been recruited yet by the CMU?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through assistance from the Ministry of Education, an internal auditor was identified from the team at the Ministry, and the individual has been seconded to the Caribbean Maritime University. So she's fully on board with us now. And in addition to that, we also got assistance from the Shipping Association of Jamaica.
Recruited one for yourself?
No, but this person is seconded for 2 years.
2 years.
During which period CMU is expected to identify one, or the person may take a permanent employment with the university.
Okay, thank you. Where are you with the annual reports for the years 2015-16, 16-17, 17-18, and 18-19 for those 4 years? It was indicated here that it would be submitted by the end of May, which is next week. Is that target likely to be met?
We are unable to meet that target, Mr. Chair, due to, in fact, it is indicated in the report that the external auditor was waiting on the Auditor General's report. Initially, when we responded, they had indicated to us the timeline for them to submit the reports. But unfortunately, after going through the auditor's report, they now begin to request additional information, which we have been providing to them. And every time they request additional information and is provided, you find additional lists come to us, which we have been responding to. So unfortunately, we won't meet the May 31st deadline.
Mm-hmm. Who are your external auditors?
Ernst & Young.
Ernst & Young?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Just asking a question, Chair. What I mean, an audit of the institution, what would the Auditor General's report have to do with compiling an audit of the institution? I mean, it would just be for reference to concerns of the Auditor General. But I wouldn't see why an external audit of the institution itself would, would have a delay because of the Auditor General's report. There must be something else why. Otherwise, I would see it as incompetency from your auditors.
Well, I am not in a position to answer that question. I think that question will have to be answered by NS and Young.
But you should be concerned.
We are concerned,
Yeah.
and the council is equally concerned about it. And the new council has had a series of meetings with NS and Young, so also internal management, and we are still where we are now. But I think they are in near completion of the 2015-2016 audit.
I would say to the ministry or to the council itself, because it's one can't manage without the other. Yeah? So there must be something more greater than the Auditor General's report that would have.
But in any event, remember, what this is saying is that the auditors were saying they wish to see the Auditor General's report before they could complete their annual reports and audited financial statements. Well, the Auditor General's report has been submitted many months ago now, so that can no longer be a basis for the hold-up of the annual reports.
But also, Chair, is that their auditors could go ahead and complete their audit itself, and then compare to the findings of the Auditor General report. But I don't see how it is that doing an audit of the institution itself would impact on what would come from the Auditor General, because
I guess before the auditors signed off on their audit, maybe they wanted to see what issues came out of the auditor's report.
Yeah.
But they have had, 6 months or thereabouts.
Yeah, but I would say that not being the practice. Exactly. Yeah. Well, Madam Acting PS, is that the practice that you would see with other institutions that the ministry would have oversight with?
Well, I have never come across a case of this nature, member. I know, however, that after the Auditor General's report became public, this was submitted to EY so that they could at least try to meet the May deadline. We have never had a situation where, certainly in my practice, where we see that the report cannot be completed because other audits were going on. One of the issues the EY had, though, in 2019 is the inability of the team being able to access the information that was being required by the Auditor General and other investigative bodies. But now that it has been completed, we would have expected that the report, at least the later ones or the earlier ones, 16-17 and 17-18, could have been completed.
Yeah, well, I can appreciate the fact that all the documents would have been at different investigative agency, right. But to say that you're waiting on the Auditor General's report would not give me comfort to say that they are doing an independent audit, independent of any other agency. Yes. So that is why I ask if there was concern on the ministry's behalf or even the council itself on that reason on why it is that the audit could not be completed, and if there are other reasons behind it.
I think the Auditor General wants to say something on this, so I would invite her to, if you wish.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to provide some clarification, and of course, I'm not here to provide an explanation for Ernst & Young. I only speak from my experience as an auditor. And I'll share with you an experience that we had with this audit, Mr. Chairman, that highlighted a risk for us that probably we didn't identify that before. We did not identify that before as auditors, and chances are I would understand another set of auditors having a similar situation. So just as an example, a common exercise that is undertaken for financial statements audit is that you will send a bank confirmation to all the banks for the bank accounts listed by the agency. And I believe we did that initially. What we found out and I suspect that this is what has caused a problem for the auditors, is that not all the bank accounts were revealed to us. We learned about the accounts that we spoke about by other means. So when we sent the bank confirmation to the banks, they provided information based on what was in the bank confirmation, but not all the accounts that are there. So for example, if CMU reveals to us that they have a bank account at a financial institution that is in New Kingston, the bank confirmation will go to New Kingston. But there may be bank accounts held at other locations for that bank account, but those will not be revealed. We had that experience. The financial statement auditors, Ernst & Young, will have having gone through the report, will realize that there is information that they did not know, that as auditors they will have to form an opinion on. So I suspect that they are now requesting that information, and my understanding based on our experience that there isn't supporting documentation for all the transactions, and that is also going to present a challenge to the auditor. So it clearly has increased the risk for the auditors, and so they would therefore probably adjust their timelines because they have to get additional information if it is that they're working towards providing an audit report, an audit opinion that is unqualified.
Chairman. Thank you very much, Chairman. AG, are you satisfied that the number of accounts that your report has indicated, which is 22, is the sum total of all the accounts that are at CMU?
Chairman, morning members, morning everybody. I would like to ask the CMU if all the bank accounts of your institution have been submitted to the Auditor General. So both questions are similar. You may wish to.
Thank you very much. To my own understanding and knowledge, through Auditor General's department, 22 bank accounts were identified. Personally, I don't know of any other one, or if it does exist.
AG, Dr. Guy had addressed his question to you. I don't know if you want to respond to it.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. My extent of knowledge, member, is limited to what has been provided to me. So I cannot speak to what exists in all. I am not in a position to do that.
No, but AG, you did indicate a while ago that it is not what was provided to you, but what you're searching for found. And I just wanted to know whether, even subsequent to this report, whether any other accounts have come to light, and not just the 22 which you have spoken to.
So no other account has come to light, but we did not go in search of any other account beyond what we reported on. There are several financial institutions in Jamaica. We did not send confirmation to all the financial institutions, and so my comment can only be limited to those that we have sent a confirmation to.
All right. Any other questions on page 5? If not, I'll move to page 6. Yes, member.
You would have had sight of the verification of responses to Auditor General's special findings, and aren't we using this particular bit of information as well? The question I want to ask is on 2. Yes, in this document. This one. Spreadsheet. This, yes, that came from the CMU through the ministry. Right. Now, I see here where management response was that minutes were not previously submitted, and minutes for the period 2018 to 2019 have been reviewed and submitted to the minister and new chairman of council. The question I want to ask is, what about the minutes for the previous years? Because from the AG's report, and I'm trying to find the exact page, there were supposed to be 12 meetings each year of the council, and that was on page 17 of the AG's report. But there were none found for 16, 17, 17, 18. However, we see here that the management is reviewing for the period 2018-2019 without any reference to 2016-17, 2017-18. Is it that there are no minutes, or is it that there were no meetings held during this particular period?
To whom are you addressing that question?
The president.
Yes,
there were limited council meetings during that period. The period 2016-2017 was when the institute was preparing itself to become a university. But the reality of it was that when the institute became a university, the then council was dissolved and a new council appointed. And in January of 2018, the institute was transferred from the Ministry of Transport and Mining to the Ministry of Education. And at the first meeting of the council, the council was dissolved by the then minister. And it took another 3 months or thereabout before a new council was constituted. So this is what created that lag during that period, why there were no council meetings. And going by the current situation of the university, the institute used to have a monthly board meeting, but that has changed to a quarterly meeting for the university council. So that is.
So are you saying, Professor
yes.
Ajaguna, that during the transition period, the CMI turned into CMU was basically running on autopilot?
It was not an autopilot. We do had the institute had a board which was shared by
so certainly, irrespective of the fact that it was transferred from one ministry to the other, there ought to have been minutes of those particular meetings that the board had. And if the matters that came to the fore now, that is before us, would have had its genesis from that time, the reality is that those minutes would need to be accounted for. So can you tell this committee why is it that we are only looking at 2018, 2019 to have those sent to the ministry so that they would be forwarded to either the AG or to this committee, and what of the previous 2 years?
All right. What I will say is for the committee to allow us to go back and look into the documents. But to my knowledge, I know there were board meetings prior to becoming a university. Why those minutes were not submitted, I cannot recall for now, or what was actually requested for. But we can research into that and respond back to AG and the committee.
Thank you. So I'll move to issue 1A. Issue 1A says permanent secretaries have oversight responsibilities for public bodies, which include the monitoring of performance against expected results, as well as risk management and provision of advice to the minister on the operations of the entity. In addition, the Government of Jamaica Accountability Framework for Senior Executive Officers requires permanent secretaries as accounting officers to obtain copies of board minutes and corporate plans for all public bodies under their portfolio. The boards of public bodies should also submit quarterly, half-yearly, and annual reports on their financial and operational performance to the Portfolio Ministry, in keeping with the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. So we have a chart or a table on page 17 of the report, and it lists for each year the various documents that ought to be submitted, the number that are expected each year, and the number that were actually delivered in those years. So, for example, for council minutes, as has been said, 12 were expected each year. None were delivered in 2016-17, none were delivered in 2017-18, and none were delivered in 2018-19. So none were delivered over 3 years, minutes of council meetings. Corporate plans, one was expected each year and was delivered in 2016-17 and 2017-18, but not in 2018-19. Half-yearly reports, 2 were expected each year, there being 2 halves in a year. None were delivered in 2016-17, 17-18, or 18-19. Quarterly reports, 4 are expected each year. 3 were submitted in 2016-17, 1 was submitted in 2017-18, and none were submitted in 2018-19. Annual reports, 1 expected each year, none have been delivered in any of those 3 years. Financial statements, 1 set per year, again, none delivered for those 3 years, 2016-17, 2017-18, and 2018-19. Management's response. Reports were not submitted previously. However, quarterly and half-yearly reports for the period 2018-19 and up to the 3rd quarter of 2019-20 have been submitted and are being reviewed for submission to the Minister. So, PS, could I ask, from the Ministry's perspective, when none of these reports, none of these council minutes were being delivered, no annual reports, no financial statements, no half-yearly reports, and so on, what was the Ministry's response to this major dereliction in the reporting requirements under the PBMA?
So, Chairman, the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information's responsibility would be for 18-19, since CMU became a part of the ministry January 2018. Again, during that year, a lot of effort was spent just trying to see how we can have the systems streamlined at the Caribbean Maritime University. One of the strategies that we implemented at the time was a corporate governance checklist, which actually outlines all the key areas that are required for good governance. And so at the time, the team at the ministry met with the CMU and advised that this would have been the approach that we would use moving forward. That was also intensified in 2019, and in 2019 we moved forward to collect all the quarterly reports as well as their minutes for 18-19. The summaries were done and submitted to our minister, and we are basically on track in terms of the quarterly reports and their submission. So because of the time frame within which we took over, it would not have provided us with adequate time, sir, to make sure that everything is in place. But we are now on track, and we do not expect that we will have this kind of situation facing us going forward.
Member Phillips and Member Daly.
It would be interesting to be able to, Chair, to see board minutes to see if there was any concern on the board during that period of the lockup. And Prof, you sit on the board also. You don't. But as part of management, you had no concern that some of these reports and audits were not being done?
I must be sincere with you that reports were being done, but why they were not submitted is what I cannot explain at this very
But
moment.
what is being reported to us now is as if some of them are just being done to report both to the Auditor General and to the Ministry. And I am sure that if this mess was not uncovered, you would probably be going down the same road without submitting any reports. But it would be interesting, Chair, to see if there was any concern at the, not board, the level of the council. Because my understanding is that it has been raised at that level, but being ignored. And it would be interesting to see minutes from that from the council meetings, if any of these, otherwise, and I have said it before, that many of these council members should not sit on other boards of government because of their dereliction of duty to the people that the taxpayers that they represent. You know, and is it possible that we can get, briefings from these council meetings to see if it was a matter that was raised? Because I remember at a previous meeting of the PAAC, it was told to us that the council reported to the minister, and the then permanent secretary basically said that they had no knowledge of what was taking place. And if that is so, then the protocols need to be changed. Because if it is that the minister then ignored instructions coming from the board or requested nothing, then I am sure that if the mess was not uncovered, probably would have gone deeper into the mess that we are now.
Well, member, I would say, sir, that I have seen enough evidence that there was quite a bit of effort made to streamline the activities with the former permanent secretary. So there has been. So it really was not difficult when I started to act to obtain the minutes and the quarterly reports and to complete the process that had already started in 2019, which was February 2019. So I believe it was really just a matter of timing. So even if this was not discovered, I believe that the PS had really put adequate systems in place for us to ensure that there is that accountability. We have in our possession the electronic copies of the minutes and the quarterly reports for the entire period, and my team also did a summary of all the minutes and the quarterly reports, so if that is required, that can be made available.
So why were they not submitted then?
Again, Chairman, member, I am not able to say why they were not submitted, but when we requested them based on the corporate governance checklist and framework, we did not have a difficulty in getting them from the institution for 2018-2019.
Chairman. Thank you. PS, I asked earlier on whether CMU was on autopilot, but I'm now inclined to think that they're on a frolic of their own. Because when you look at 2.6 on page 18 of the AG's report, we know that the Ministry of Transport and Mining requested the submission of outstanding annual reports and audited financial statements for 2014-15, 2015-16, and 2016-17 financial years. However, despite being warned by the Ministry in September 2017 of possible sanctions for contravening the PBMA Act, only the audited financial statements for 2014-15 financial year were submitted. Now, you know, Chairman, I can understand the fact that, okay, university never thought it by themselves to do that. But having been communicated to by the parent ministry at that particular point in time, that you are going to, we warn you, and if you contravene, something is going to happen. Seemingly no regard was placed on this warning. and they were an entity on their own, acting on a frolic of their own, and doing their own stuff.
It's worth bearing in mind that no audited financial statements have been produced for this entity since 2014-15. That's the most recent year we have. So there's nothing for 15-16, 16-17, 17-18, 18-19, 19-20 thus far. I don't know when you expect to have them finalized. You've indicated that the May deadline that is not likely to be met. But I suppose the answer is they didn't respond to the September 27 warning.
Yes.
Because they weren't in a position to do it, because they still don't have those audited financials, and we're now in 2020. So, no, well, what the PS was getting was minutes and internally generated reports.
Quarterly internal
yeah, but
reports.
The financial statement, audited financial statements, they still don't have. Yeah. Yes, but
I'd like to make a short comment, then a question. In all my years observing government, I've never seen where a department, an agency, or a public body receive a warning from their parent ministry through their PS. These warnings usually come from the permanent secretary, or a report submitted by the Auditor General, who does not submit it directly to the Parliament, but send it to the line ministry for them to have time to respond. I've never seen where an entity being warned by the parent ministry and has not acted. It's very strange.
We have it as a basic report. Mr. Chairman, do you have this one? Caribbean Maritime references in Auditor General special report.
Yes, we have that.
Right.
You were referring to page 3.
I'm referring to page 3 of 8.
And the logistics company 1.
The logistics company 1, which was paid 989 million.
But bear in mind, Member Hannah, I think that payment related to sandwich panels, high beams, not the computer equipment. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I take it, Member Hannah, that you'd prefer me to respond generally and not specifically to the 989 US. But through you, Chair, the report would have set out, specifically so in the executive summary, and in my forward, my view that many of these payments did not embrace the stipulated government procedures. In fact, I went further to recommend that post this report, and let me use this opportunity to reinforce that this is what we call a special audit. It is not an investigation in its full sense. What the audit does is to highlight issues that are deemed red flags for further thorough investigation. Now, it's my understanding that there is an investigation being conducted, I do not know the extent of that investigation, the extent of which it is taking up the findings of these reports, but under the FAA Act, it is the permanent secretary that ought to act on this report and to cause an investigation to be done in a thorough sense, to take action, because beyond this report, I have no further power to recommend any action against anyone, but the report would have made it clear. In fact, my reports are reports of exception, meaning that I report on matters that are not in keeping with the stipulated procedures and expected governance and procedures. So it is for the Ministry of Education, the CMU Council, and other investigative authorities to take it further.
That leads me to my second question. Yes, is that investigation currently underway, as we see, that the AG has recommended?
Yeah. And this is in specific reference to this particular item? Or broadly, all of these, very broadly?
Because Chairman, what she has pointed out is
was a series of procurement violations, but this one in particular stands out, not only because of the size of it, nearly $1 million US, but the fact that they incurred demurrage charges totaling 33 million Jamaican dollars for these items. That means that they were imported and they were on the wharf and were not cleared. And 33 million is a huge demurrage expense and a complete waste of money from the point of view of the institution. No doubt the shipping companies were happy to collect it, but from the point of view of the public purse, this is a major violation. And then it goes on to say that the building for which these inputs were being purchased, the project was still at foundation stage after approximately 2 years. So this $1 million US, or just under $1 million US, was spent. The foundation stage is where it's reached after 2 years. And they incurred $33 million of demurrage costs on the various beams and other assembly materials that were imported. So the question really is, what is the response of the ministry in relation to this and other? And this report is replete with things that jump out as being improper, malfeasance or misfeasance. And we know that there are proceedings where persons are before the courts and so on. But from the point of view of the ministry's own responsibility to ensure accountability for the things that have been brought to light by the report, what has the ministry done in that regard? Obviously, I know that you've been trying to improve the governance arrangements, etc. There's a new board in place and all that side of things. But in terms of what happened, what is being done about getting to the bottom of that and trying to ensure that if anything happened that ought not to have happened, the public purse is not depleted without recourse and so on? Is the ministry doing anything? And if so, what is it doing?
Right. So, Chairman and Member Hanno, the ministry and the team at the ministry would have done a thorough investigation of all the areas that were highlighted in the report. Hence, the report we submitted here we had to first verify what the Auditor General wrote and sent our acceptance in terms of what was written in the report, which was done. And then we expanded that investigation to also include recommendations for the CMU moving forward. And so that is why the report we submitted to the House here is really 61 pages, because we needed to make sure that we go into all the detailed areas to make sure that we have a full understanding. Now, following that investigation, which we have really uncovered a number of different areas that needed strengthening. At the first council meeting, I got the opportunity to present extensively to the council members the findings that we have came up with, or we have seen from the auditor's report and the explanations, and we also made recommendations to the council as to what needed further investigation because these are internal operations, and we also made recommendations in terms of changes that could be done to strengthen the management framework at the CMU. There were some specific matters that the Auditor General asked for the ministry to take on outside of the corporate governance areas, which actually include the provision of the award that was provided for the president, or was awarded for the president, and that I did an extensive investigation and submitted a detailed report to the council chairman, as well as recommendations for the council to take the decisions. I believe that Professor Hibarim provided as much information as he possibly could with the rest of the team to the ministry, but unfortunately I have to say that there are still many unanswered questions that only persons who are internal to the CMU will be able to come forward with that information. And so I believe Professor or the rest of the team members who are here would be able to provide a little more information. Now, Chairman and Member Hannah, if there is the need for the ministry to do any further investigation as guided. Well, I'm saying if there is a need for any further detailed investigation to be done, the ministry has indicated to CMU that we will make available our chief internal auditor as well as our director of compliance to work with the team at CMU to complete that investigation.
Member Hanna, you have anything further to say on that issue? Because if not, I'll move to Member Daly, and then Member Phillips, then Member Bunting. Member Guy.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just something. Sorry, I think Ms. Hannah is still.
Yeah, I'm slightly perturbed by her answer. And the reason why. No, I'll see if it would. I said I'm slightly perturbed by the PS's answer because I'm not sure that really covers it. And I'm not sure that I'm satisfied that with all of the paperwork that the systems are going to be in place. And I wanted to ask the Auditor General, are you satisfied with that answer? I don't want to put her on the spot like that, but I don't know that we're not going to come back here with the. There seems to be an exodus with resignations and persons not wanting to stay there anymore, even after the ministry has done its investigation. So something just not adding up for me. Maybe something is just not adding up for me.
I mean, the Auditor General has done her audit, produced her report. It is now for the ministry, the institution itself, and if to the extent that wrongdoing is found to have taken place, the law enforcement side of the state, whether it be the Integrity Commission or the FID or whatever it may be, to investigate. I mean, it's similar to Petrojam, where the report is given. A lot of people who are implicated in the report leave the institution, and we're still waiting for something to happen to hold people to account in that instance. So, I mean, I don't think the Auditor General can be asked to do more than her duty, which she has done by producing this report. Yeah, sorry? Yes, do you want to say something? Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm agreeing with you. Under the law, the Auditor General can't do more than produce a report and highlight to the Parliament shortcomings, good practices, anything that has to be improved upon, and so on. I am posing a question now to Madam Pierce to to say, have you triggered, has the ministry, not you, triggered any investigation upon receipt of the Auditor General's report on the CMU? Just to be clear.
Members, just if you have this document, you can look at page 19 to 20. 19 to 20 on this specific question of this procurement item for the nearly $1 million US. And the middle column is the response of the ministry, or again, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying your question isn't to be answered. I'm just pointing you to where in this document it is addressed. This one here, remember that,
Yes.
not the prompt, but the.
So I'm back in the queue now, Chairman.
Yeah.
Spreadsheet.
Yes, I was the next one, but Mr. Daly took back his space.
I think.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
You've been yielded to.
Thank you. AG, I am a little curious, and I want, for my own understanding, we see here on the page of this document the identification of the individual 1, 2, 3, etc. But I see helper 2. Is there helper 1 and driver 2? Is there a driver 1? I'm looking at this document that we just got, Chairman. Front page of it. Yes. Even in the report on page 24, it makes reference to helper 2 and driver 2. But all the other individuals are 1 to 4, 5, suppliers 1 to 7, concessionaire 1, but there's a helper 2 and a driver 2. So are there helper 1 and driver 1 as well?
Oh, Devon McQueen is driver 2.
2.
Yeah, why would they say a driver? That's a guy.
No, man, it's them.
I just
Oh, thank you.
didn't even see when I started.
I'm just trying to reconcile what is here with what is in this report. I did not prepare this document. I don't believe I can give you an explanation as to why we went straight to 2 instead of 1, Mr. Chairman, because a quick search of the report will show we do not have a helper 1. We just have helper 2. Yeah. I know that there are 2 helpers. Why we decided to call this one helper 2 instead of helper 1, I'm unable to give an explanation right now, but I know there's another helper in the mix.
So,
yes. Right.
so, sorry, are we at the procurement of lunches yet?
Well, there are 2 persons who've been waiting to ask questions.
No.
Yeah.
I just want to know. If you tell me yes, I'll wait.
Are we at what?
Procurement of lunches in terms of the
At
procurement
lunches,
breaches.
where we have started looking at the procurement issues.
Breaches. Okay.
And lunch suppliers is one of the items. So, yes, we are there. All right. Go ahead, Member Phillips.
Chair, just through you, and it's just a general question, because, being that we have gone through the whole procurement and the breaches, Prof, the university itself has a procurement department. I'm asking you a question.
We have just established a procurement unit. We never had one, but we had a procurement committee. But we now have a unit.
So with all the purchasing prior to this establishment of this unit, who would sign off on procurement for the university, and who would do the due diligence before sending it to the board itself?
Where there were individuals that had that responsibility, but it was never a unit. And we equally had the committee, which was equally operating ad hoc, never had procurement committee meetings and minutes and all that. But through the Ministry of Education, that is now fully established.
So who would then sign off on invoices? Well, let me ask, who were the members of the committee then?
Then we had Captain Newman. Are you asking me to name names?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. We had Captain Newman. We had Mr. Peter McCarthy. And we also had, that is the procurement committee. And we also had...
Of the council?
Not council,
of the school?
Of the university.
Okay, good.
The university,
yeah.
Yes. I could remember vividly those two names now, but I will have to research and give you the other names.
And you were not a member of that?
No.
All right. And did they meet regularly? So these things that we're looking at, I mean, Madam AG, is there evidence that these payments or these ever went to the procurement committee for signing off? Because, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, I have to apologize because I'm trying to find helper one in the report, so I didn't hear some of the conversation.
Go ahead.
The issue is the procurement function and how it was managed during the period covered by a report. We were told by Professor Ajaguna that they did not have a procurement unit at the time, but there was a procurement committee. And he named a couple of individuals who were on that committee. The question from Member Phillips is whether, from your perspective, the Auditor General's department's perspective, was that procurement committee functioning properly when all these violations took place? Is that essentially it? Yeah.
Well, what I'm aware of, and I would have mentioned that in the report, we saw evidence that the committee met and approved. What we did not have is the extent of the evaluation that was done by the committee. So, and we did not see evidence of the communication between the committee and the other units within the CMU that would have been required to actually provide input.
As Prof said, they weren't keeping minutes, and it wasn't being done in a very formal way. And quite obviously, from what we've seen in terms of the outcomes, it wasn't being done properly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and without reference to the report, I think one of the concerns that would have highlighted itself through our findings here is the fact that the procurement committee appeared not to have made informed decisions. Mm-hmm. So whereas we saw approval, the timing of the approval was questionable, and the basis on which the approvals were provided were also in question.
Remember, there's a public service announcement I've been asked to make. There's a silver Axion motor vehicle. The license plate number is 8712JH, and you're being asked to remove it, please. Whoever has that silver Axion 8712JH. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and Madam AG, and it comes right back to that point, because with what we were given in a previous committee meetings, a lot of the approvals basically came from the office of the president and signing off on invoices and payment when they ought to be paid. You see bills coming in today, and by later in the evening they are being paid and paid in full. And that is why I was asking, because in all the deliberations that I have been involved with, we never heard of a procurement officer, a procurement manager, but yet still you had approvals of heads of departments. And for me personally, Chair, is that they are all culpable in the run-up to this audit report, because there were payments made, and made to, to logistic companies and to individuals for services that in some instances were questionable, So in this instance, we're $989,000 US. Who did the due diligence before? And that is why also, was there also a procurement committee of the council itself that these contracts went to for approval? Was there ever such one?
There was never a procurement committee of the council, but there was a project committee of the council. So all procurement issues went directly to the procurement. Project subcommittee.
There was a lot of procurement going on, and
Yeah,
the council was hardly meeting.
So you're saying that the council had no say at all in procurements that took place at the institution?
I'm saying there was no procurement subcommittee, but there was a project subcommittee. So all procurement issues went to the project subcommittee of the council.
Did all projects come to the council, or just selected ones for approval?
I cannot speak specifically. I think Elaine Hayden, who is the director of projects and strategic initiative, is here with us. Maybe she can respond to that.
Because you're fortunate that you are a part of the management team and you also sat on the council.
Yeah, but I was not a member of that committee.
So who is that?
I am.
Hello.
Good afternoon. So
Your name?
my name is Elaine Hayden, Director of Special Projects and Strategic Initiatives.
Elaine. Yeah.
My name is Elaine Hayden, Director of Special Projects and Strategic Initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
There was a project committee to which I reported through the president. I reported directly to the president of the university, and there was a projects committee that met. So all projects were first taken to the management of CMU. The general management was also taken to the executive. It formed part of the strategic planning. I don't know why. It formed part of the strategic planning process. And once approved, we were asked to develop a project plan and an initial costing, and that was taken back to the executive management and the projects committee. I did not attend project meetings of the council, so the report would have been to the projects committee of the council or the board.
Because again, Chair, it would be interesting again to see what came from the President's office to the Council for sign-off on procurement. Because again, a lot of the approvals for purchase orders, approvals for payments came from the President's office. And it shows that there was basically a weakness of the Council itself. If there was not a procurement and just
I was responsible for those. Those were...
Including the sandwich panels?
Yes, that was a project I had responsible.
The Auditor General's report, page 31, 3.23, says, information provided to us by CMU suggested that 5 bidders, including Logistics Company 1, which is business supply source, were invited to bid for the supply of sandwich panels. However, CMU was unable to indicate the basis on which the companies were pre-selected. CMU breached the procurement guidelines, which requires international competitive bidding and/or local competitive bidding for procurement of goods above 60 million. We noted that a response deadline of March 6, 2018 was set. However, the selected company, Bidder 1, Logistic Company 1, was non-responsive, having submitted its bid on March 13, 2018. A week late, and I pause there and go back to the management response, where it says, page 18, this is this document, the matrix. On that document, it says, CMU facilitated the process by providing the bid documents to the other suppliers which were submitted through Logistic Company 1 to CMU on March 13. Now, if I'm reading this right, it's saying that the other bidders who would have responded by March 6th on time, their bids were provided to Logistic Company 1 to facilitate the process. And if there is some clarification, I'd like to understand it. But let me continue. Of note, Logistics Company 1, Business Supply Source, was incorporated in February 2018, scarcely a month before this process was in fact the same month. I have never seen a stronger prima facie case of corruption than this. Never seen it. Especially when we read on that when it comes to the payment. Now let me see if I can find. Oh, you thank you.
Go on this one. This one. Page 19. Page 19 on the other document.
On April 13th, now this is 1 month after receiving the bid, despite the absence of a formal contract, bank guarantee, or irrevocable letter of credit, I imagine yes, or irrevocable letter of credit to secure CMU's interest, the university paid the full payment of US $621,000 to Logistics Company 1, 2 days after the procurement committee gave its approval. Now, it goes on then to say that that 621 bid, which was a little more competitive than Bidder Company 2, 740, Bidder Company 3, 783, says that we found no evidence that the contract was submitted to the National Contracts Commission. Essential components required to enable the construction of the building. So, Mr. Chairman, this company was formed at the same time and obviously specifically to bid for this contract. It was provided, it did not meet the bidding deadline, so it was not responsive. It was provided with the bids from the other companies to ensure that it could come in below their level. Ultimately, it was paid way in excess. It would have been for 50% more of its original bid. The payments were expedited 2 days after the procurement committee approved, without any contract or any security for the payment, especially given that this company was not even 2 months old and would have had no balance sheet or track record to support that. I really am very interested to hear from those who had first-hand experience. And I would like to hear first from the lady. I unfortunately didn't catch the name because you still had on the mask and it was muffled, but the special projects and procurement related to construction.
She's not with procurement. They said there is none. They dealt with these
special projects, but related to this construction. She confirmed that she was involved with the sandwich panels procurement. You said that management, general management, and by that I assume you mean the president and the deputy president, at least would have been briefed on the project.
Included in the audit report, not for any lack, but simply because of how it was. So we had started looking at sandwich panels from as far back as 2016, and we had tried, and by we I mean my team, through the guidance of the president, because my team and I reported directly to the president. We had been trying to find building material given our financial constraints, and also because of where we were, we needed to build quickly, and we also needed a material that would withstand the elements by CMU. When we looked as far as Trinidad, where we gave them the material listing in terms of the size of the building, and at the time we were looking at 3 separate buildings, and my understanding early 2017, I think it was February, and they showed the costing for all of those. That was brought to the attention of the president. Well, it was in discussion, and I was instructed to scale down the size of the building and focus only on the lecture theater building. So we gave the material, we gave the sizing of the building again. We then had discussion with the president and said, based on where this is, we would need to go through the process. And so a letter was written to the then PS Bernard seeking direct contracting, and that was from February. And we got back permission from PS to go ahead with direct contracting. When I looked at the fact that, and so this was my decision, when I looked at the fact that we were told they were a sourcing company and we had gotten permission to direct contract with them, I said to the president that I would prefer that they show that they are in fact a sourcing company, so that we know that based on the knowledge we had of the costing out there, as well as for them to demonstrate that they were actually a sourcing company. In discussion with the ministry, it was said to be a misguided approach, because if we had approval for direct contracting, then we should have just proceeded. So the fact that the quotations, so the fact that we got the costing from the other entities was an effort on our part to ask them to demonstrate that they were in fact a sourcing company, because we were acting on the instructions to proceed in a certain way.
I don't understand. So how did you come across this sourcing company?
I was advised by the president that they had identified, he had gone to, I think, some conference and had come back, because we kept going back to him with the results of our investigation in terms of finding anyone locally or so who could provide. That was sent through. We also sent the 5 quotations that we subsequently asked them to provide to demonstrate, and that was the error on my part, to demonstrate that they were in fact a sourcing company, because that was my understanding.
So the fact that the steel beams and the other supplies necessary to support the sandwich panels were not included in the original bid document. Was that an error? Was that inexperience? How did that occur? And if I may, thank you very much for being as forthcoming as you are, but what is your training? Are you a construction professional?
No, I'm not. I'm a trained project manager and I'm an IT professional.
So who would have specified the bid document? Who would have given the bid document for the building?
So because we were asked to deal with sandwich panels, I was subsequently instructed to have them look at sourcing steel as well, on several buildings at CMU when we were putting up the containerized buildings. So we had an idea what the cost of the steel would be if we were to look at, and so we were trying to find a more cost-effective solution.
This is interesting. Mr. Chairman, I have a second question, as I had said, but I know there are other members may have something on this particular issue. So I will yield to them to complete. But I have a second question.
Yes, specifically. I want to know if it says the university is accepting that an error was made when the full payment of $621,000 was made to Logistic One 2 days after the procurement committee gave its approval. I want to make sure that it was the procurement committee or your projects committee gave the approval. Which is correct here?
The approval first came from the Ministry of Education via P.S. Bernard, and his approval was submitted to the procurement committee with all the documentation, including the 5 codes, and that was approved by the procurement committee.
The procurement committee of CMU?
Yes, sir.
But you never had one. That's what is being said. That
no, there was no procurement unit member, but there was a procurement committee.
Who was the head of procurement? When you were the head, you are still head of projects. Who was the head of procurement for the Caribbean Maritime University at this time?
As far as I'm aware, there was no head of procurement. There was a procurement manager, and there was a procurement committee.
So, who was the procurement manager?
Miss Carol Campbell.
Is she here?
No, sir.
Is she still at the university?
Yes, sir.
So I just want to be sure, the projects committee recommend these panels and payments were made 2 days after the procurement committee gave its approval.
If I may.
At what stage did your committee, the special projects committee, approve these things?
There was a projects committee, and the project committee met invariably once a month, sometimes twice a month, depending on the frequency. The process at the CMU provided the information to the procurement committee, and in this instance, we provided the project document, we provided all the information received, we provided the approval from the PS, and it was then taken to the procurement committee. When the matter is we do not have visibility of what takes place with the procurement committee, but the procurement committee, once it approves something, then it is sent to the office of the president. It is a recommendation to the office of the president, and the documentation from the procurement committee does not go back. At the time, it did not go back to the individual units, so we did not have sight once the procurement committee had made the approval.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. Your expertise is in project management, and so you would have been in charge of this particular project?
Yes.
Okay. So there are 3 discrepancies in the project, apart from the others that others have raised, which I have some red flags with. So in the management of the project, from the beginning, you've sought to clarify the issue with the direct sourcing. But you admit that under the circumstances, that should not have been the case.
Yes, ma'am.
The other issue I have is the general character of the Caribbean Maritime University is to train people in logistics, correct?
Correct.
However, this particular project is clear, and the university admits it, that even though it is a logistics facility and institution, it does not utilize its own services, correct?
That is correct. At the time, there was no logistics unit. One has recently been set up, but it is largely focused on the movement of transportation and those matters.
So there was a breakdown in the logistics planning as well, because the demurrage and working through third-party relationships is what also caused the breakdown.
The university member had no one specifically responsible for clearing any items.
Okay, so hold that point. The second issue I want to raise with you is when you realize that the PS was the person signing off through the president, because you would prepare all of the data, submit it to the president, and the president would work through the PS, correct?
Correct.
At what point did you realize that the person or the partner in Logistics 1 was a former member and staff member of the Ministry of Education?
I'm sorry?
CMU records show that the entire $989,485 was paid to Logistics Company 1, through its related company to procure the sandwich panels. Review of correspondence indicated that a senior partner of Logistics Company 1 was a business partner with the former minister of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. So he was a partner to the minister.
I read about it in the papers, member.
Okay. And I believe you, and I accept that, because I can't imagine that you're sitting here feeling very comfortable at this point. The final thing I wanted to raise has to do with the panels and the storing outdoors, because you responded to Member Bunting about not being a construction professional. And so, but the facility had a construction professional who understood the analysis of structural details and the components that went into construction, correct?
Correct.
So at what point, after the records came up and it demonstrated that during, first of all, the things were stored outdoors, and between August to October of 2018, further to that, CMU did not provide any evidence that a physical inspection of the panels was conducted to determine the quantity and quality of the received sandwich panels and related materials. So you receive the panels after having not put them in the first place. After you receive them, they're placed outside. After they're placed outside, the construction professional that is in residence and on staff at the Caribbean Maritime Institution or University does not inspect the said panels. Correct?
That is not correct, member. So if I could provide clarification, the sandwich panels come with plastic coating on both sides, and they can be stored outside.
No, that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that they were not inspected, even though you say that you're saying that that is not true, that this report is not correct.
It is not correct, member. The Auditor General, we did not have a sit-down discussion regarding some of these matters, and I'm not laying fault anywhere. It is just the reality of what it is. Mm-hmm. When the sandwich panels came, they had to be physically removed. Well, they had to be manually removed because they are, so the thickest, I believe, was 10 millimeters. The thinnest was 4 millimeters. And so we couldn't use a crane, so we had to offload them by hand. And I'll come back to that in a minute when I talk about the costs for demurrage. So we had to offload them by hand. So they were inspected because we had to remove every single panel by hand. The metal beams were removed with the use of a crane. And when the metal beams were taken off, we subsequently primed them. And we've gone through the process of priming them to make sure, because we are by the seashore, and we recognize over the years that salt does affect a lot of our infrastructure. So the metal was primed, and until we closed down, we were in the process of arranging for a second coat of primer to be applied to the metal, but the sandwich panels are coated. So storing them outside does not in any way degrade them. So once they are installed, then you tear the plastic coating
No,
off.
and I accept
Yes.
all of that. The point that the larger points that I'm making are these. One, I think staff members like yourselves were significantly taken advantage of without providing significant information to you, and things were being run through the university, as you can see. But the second point I wanted to make is that you can't be a facility teaching logistics, and all of this evidence is coming out to demonstrate that within the institution as well, you have no systems and mechanisms to make sure that from point A to Z, all the systems are going in the right direction.
So I do take your point, member. So I would want to go back to the matter of the demurrage. The university did not have anyone at the time with responsibility for clearing any goods or services. I got there in 2014, and we have been using the services of logistics providers and custom brokers because the expertise does not lie within the administrative staff of the university for that, and you would need a licensed custom broker, and I'm giving my understanding of it. So there was no logistics unit at the time. And the practice has been that we engage the services of custom brokers or logistics providers to move the goods and services from the port, and that has been happening for some time. When the containers arrived, so demurrage is related to the rental of the containers essentially, right? So what happened in this case, we got 39 containers filled with sandwich panels and metal beams. Based on the shipment, they were shipped on several bills of lading. And based on how the Assecuda system works, and also because of how the shipping line works, the containers, so they would send 9 containers to us. I think the first shipment we got, the first set that came on campus was 9 containers. So we got the first 9 containers, and they came, and then customs came and inspected those containers, and we opened them and started offloading them. As I had stated before, we had to manually lift the sandwich panels. So we're talking about 39 40-foot containers filled to the brim with sandwich panels and metal beams. The sandwich panels could not be moved mechanically, so we had to get persons to physically lift them out. Now, while that offloading was taking place, the containers on the port could not be moved because of how the Assecuda system worked. Essentially,
that's what I'm
realizing.
realizing.
It is a steel frame building.
I'm realizing
it is a steel frame building.
Yes.
So once the foundation is in place and the framing goes up, then the walls are clad.
Yeah, I understand that. I just wanted to make.
It is a steel frame building. So then, while we are offloading the containers, those containers that are on campus, the other containers were accruing demurrage charges. We tried in many ways to speed up the process, including I engaged with the president, and he engaged with the then Commissioner of Customs to see how we could speed up the process of
could have been avoided had CMU utilized a shipper-owned container arrangement resulted from CMU's failure to return the container as scheduled. This resulted from, and it goes on, what have you done so far in all of this? I'm not even asking the PS, but what have you done to correct that situation so you don't have to go through it again? But to deal with these issues? as an example, no, I want to know, they say a framework agreement is in place, but I'm asking her what practical steps now are in place at the university.
I would defer that question to the president member.
Yeah,
And if I may clarify, the reason why I would defer it is not someone that would be responsible to the projects unit. It would be someone responsible to the university, maybe in another division.
You don't want me to speak? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the president was just going to answer that final question from.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the House. The university is a training institution, and we do not employ on our staff custom brokers or shipping agents. We use the services of shipping agents and a project committee of the council. And I must say that the first thing that was done when this problem came up was for the Ministry of Education's intervention to bring the procurement officer from the ministry to train all our staff members in the process of procurement. I must say and I must admit that across the university we were guilty when this is concerned, because we never had those units or the committee in place. We're going to discontinue, in fact, we have discontinued the process of buying for the university without a proper approval through the procurement unit and procurement committee. And that the current projects unit will be repurposed to focus specifically on internal projects. The university is no longer going to engage itself in external projects. Even within the university itself, projects of that magnitude will not be undertaken by the unit, but rather be contracted out to specialists.
I have a question with a number of parts, and it has to do with the launch.
She mentioned, she didn't really answer the question. She mentioned that they did some containerized building and they had some idea of the pricing of local contractors, right, the price of steel. But there were no answer the question as to why the process bypassed local suppliers or contractors. I wish if she could give us an answer for that. The other issue had to do with 3.23. The bid closing date was the 6th of March, and then this new bidder submitted bid on the 30th of March, which was after the closing date, which is totally irregular. It's totally irregular. What I want to know, why was that allowed? 1, and 2, why were the documents from other bidders, how and why it was given to this contractor? How we got in the position of this bidder, Logistic Company 1? Because that is totally highly unusual and irregular also. And the other question is, at what point the decision was made to do direct contract? Was this after the bid documents were submitted, or before?
So if I could answer them in the order, sir. We had gotten an indication of cost for steel locally, and also from, we'd looked at per unit cost, and in the other instance, we gotten for a supplier from Trinidad to give an indication of cost of steel. Because we were doing external projects, and we use steel a lot in those, so we needed to have an idea of the cost. So we use the per unit cost as an indication of the overall cost, and that gave us an indication that the cost of steel locally would be greater, and that was the reason for that. In terms of the documents, As I had indicated before, we were told that BSS was a sourcing company and that they would take care of the sourcing. So we were asked to provide the information. So when they gave the initial costing, PS, I took it and for direct contracting, and I'm told by when we had the discussions with the Ministry of Education that that would have been sufficient. It was my error in trying to determine that they were in fact a sourcing company who would give us value, and so I requested that we send them instructions to demonstrate that they could get it. And so when we asked that, I was told to send them the documentation for the companies, because they were the ones who identified the companies. So it wasn't a situation where we provided the information to them. It was actually the reverse.
What I'm asking is, you have other bidders, so I can't wrap my head around what you're saying.
So, sir, let me be very clear.
If you have other bidders, why were their bids sent to this company? If the guy is supposed to give some pricing, you tell this company what you want. Why did you have to give them the documents or the bid documents from other bidders?
Sir,
why?
If I may, sir, I think the misconception is that we gave them the documents for the other bidders.
Just a minute. This is what is said here. This is what is said in the Auditor General report. Are you saying then that the report from the Auditor General is incorrect?
Sir, I can only tell you what.
No, I'm asking you a simple question.
Sir, I understand, but
can you answer the question? Are you saying that the report from the Auditor General is incorrect?
What I'm saying, sir, is that I did not give Logistics Company 1 the bids. They provided the bids for the other bidders because we requested them to demonstrate that they were in fact a sourcing company.
So what bids you collected then on March 6th? What bid you collected on March 6th? If this is the case that this guy is going to give bid for the person, it doesn't make sense. And I ask you the question also, at what point was the decision made to do direct contract? At what point?
I was instructed in February, sir.
To do direct contract?
To deal with Logistics Company 1 in terms of direct contracting. The letter to the PS was on that basis. I made the error in saying that, well, the norm for us is that we need 5 quotes.
Right.
I was told.
And that the information about the other bidders' quotations, they had that information. And they came in lower than everybody else. You're now saying that this was a direct contracting situation approved by the Ministry of Education as such. There's nothing in the Auditor General's report to suggest that this was a procurement by way of direct contracting. This is extremely perplexing because the narrative in the report is about a bidding process which went awry. What you are saying is that this was a direct contracting arrangement. So somehow bids were you sought bidders. And what I understand you saying is that you asked Logistics Company 1 to get those bidders.
Sir, if I can provide some timelines, because when the matter came up, the initial report from the Auditor General's Department had a timeline of the events, and we actually gave them the timeline and the supporting documentation of what took place. So in February of 2018, I was asked to deal directly with Logistics Company 1 because I was told that they were a sourcing company. We got a quotation from them on February 27th, 2018. At the time when we spoke with them, we were talking about 3 buildings. We subsequently asked them to adjust it on the 28th of February to 1 building, because when the information was provided and it was seen the cost of those 3 buildings, which was presented to the President, it was decided that based on the funding which I'm told was in place, we could only do the lecture theatre building at the time, sir. And this discussion took place between February 28th and March 5th the internal discussions at CMU. Sir? On March 5th, I again contacted BSS and told them that needed to be adjusted. So we had already received a quotation for...
Yeah. So after the bid deadline had passed is when a letter was sent to the ministry, to the then PS, seeking to proceed by way of direct contracting?
Yes, sir. And those were my instructions, because my understanding is that discussions were taking place and the documentation from the president.
And you didn't solicit these other bids which are listed in the report?
They were provided through Logistics Company 1.
When you say through, what do you mean? They went and got those bids?
Yes, sir.
So they produced a number of bids that were higher than theirs and then won the contract. But even though it wasn't a bidding basis, it was a direct contracting thing. Yeah. Member what?
What the projects manager is telling us now contradicts management's own I mean, the sentence there is not very clear, but on the first reading of it seemed consistent with what the Auditor General's report said. But your explanation now is that the bid documents were sent to Logistics Company 1, who then circulated the documents to the other suppliers? Is that what you are saying today?
Yes, sir. And just to be clear, bid documents is a one-page document that says we're seeking for building size of X. There was no formal tender document.
There was no formal tender document.
So we were asked to provide them with the documentation for the information to be provided to CMU.
So for an expenditure of approximately $1 million, you just send out a one-page document saying we're seeking a building size of X square footage, and you're going to use sandwich panels to do it, and that you considered as a professional project manager.
Submission to cabinet. I am not in any way seeking to absolve myself of responsibility, but there are various players in the mix that would have caused for a the full process to be borne out, and we failed in that regard.
We have to appreciate your honesty and transparency.
Yeah, but okay, but are you moving to the on this? Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Hayden, who are the members of the Procurement Committee?
The head of the Procurement Committee at the time.
You said there was no head.
There was no unit, but there was a procurement committee.
Manager. You said there was a procurement
manager. There was
manager.
also a procurement manager.
The containers had to be manually stripped. But I find that a little curious and strange, because if you look at the Auditor General's report at 3.27, CMU also paid another logistic company 2, a total of 45.28 million, of which 12.39 relates to the shipping costs for the sandwich panels, clearance and delivery. Clearance and delivery. And to my understanding, that delivery would have been to your premises if you pay them to do that. So it would basically mean that the delivery to you would not have taken that time as you are indicating, being on the wharf, and because of ASICUDA dictates that you could not remove the container. And the second question that I want to ask, yes, if you have their containers. But the other one I'd like to ask is at 321 AG, you represented to the permanent secretary that you wanted this emergency procurement because you needed the building to be completed before the end of summer in order to prepare for the 2018-2019 school year. The AG also went on in that same 321 to say this was contrary to the project document approved by the President, which indicates that project completion time of January 2020. Now, I want to understand what would be in the mind of those who made that representation to the permanent secretary seeking direct contracting, and who was it that made that representation of completing the project by summer so that 2018-2019 school year would have benefited from that new facility and those new buildings. But yet, at the same time, the directive and the recommendation of the project document approved by the President indicates that project completion time of almost a year and 2020, which is 18, 19, 20, which would have been about a year and 3 months, thereabouts. Can you shed some light? Because I am confused, and I'm sure, based on what I'm said, my colleagues are seeking your answers too. Ms. Hayden.
Sir, so the project document was prepared by my team. We had a consultant architect, we had a structural engineer, and so the team would prepare the documentation based on the timeline. The lecture theater building is a steel frame building, and so the foundation would be built, the steel frame would be put up in its entirety, and then it would be clad. Our submission to the Office of the President.
No. It would have, the summer, as far as my understanding, would be the end of the 2017-2018 school.
Instructed to complete another 2 structures, which we did, so that we would have had adequate classroom space for the school year. And so we completed what was an expansion to an existing building, and we gave a further, it had 3 classrooms, and it ended up with 8 classrooms, at the end of the day. And we started work on the other building, which was the expansion to the engineering workshop, which is now a 3-story building on campus with 10 additional classrooms.
So in light of that, was any correspondence sent back to the permanent secretary to indicate that despite what we wanted to achieve in our letter seeking direct contracting, that we were not able to have done that?
I'm not aware of the letter, sir.
You're not aware of a letter. Can you explain the other question I asked earlier on?
So the submission for the direct contracting would have been made from the Office of the President, sir.
Okay, 327 about the 12.39 million paid to the shipping company for all those panels, clearance and delivery. And the fact that you indicated that part of the challenge you had in paying the demurrage costs were because the containers were still on the wharf.
In the order in which they showed up on the Asakuda system.
So whose responsibility would have been? Because you had already paid logistic company number 2 for clearance and delivery.
Sir, if I may, the clearance and delivery, the charges, the full demurrage clearance and delivery charges would have been paid after the fact in some instances, because logistics company too, and has happened with all the delivery cleared for the university from the port, is that the logistics providers, the freight forwarders, the brokers clear the goods on CMU's behalf and then is repaid. In the case of this one, the cost was too much for the logistics company to bear. I believe in one instance, one payment was $12 million. And so they liaised through the President's office with the Treasury Department, and the payments were made over time, so it was not paid in full upfront because the costs were not known in full upfront. They were paid over time.
Ms. Hayden, are you telling me that CMU had no idea as to what the costs were on a daily or weekly basis for these containers?
There is a cost that is known in industry. I don't remember what the rate is.
No, CMU. Was CMU aware of these costs? I'm not asking about the industry.
Invoice submitted to the CMU upfront because the demerge costs would not have been known because they would have been accrued on a day-by-day basis depending on my understanding subsequently.
It's unbelievable.
Ms. Hayden, you had indicated that this huge demerge expense was as a result of containers being brought to your premises. They had to be manually unpacked, unloaded, and you could not return them until that had taken place. And so you were incurring demerge charges back at the wharf where the remaining containers were stacked waiting to come to be unloaded. But in the Auditor General's report, there's a different rationale or explanation given for these demerge charges. Doesn't make reference to that really. It talks about the demerge charges resulting from CMU's inability to provide customs with the requisite documentation to facilitate the customs clearance process, as a shipment was split from the factory, but only one invoice was sent instead of corresponding invoices for the split. We noted that in addition to losing the benefit of the use of having its own containers, the absorption of demerge charge of 33 million may have been avoided with proper monitoring and oversight of the shipping process. This idea that it's a documentation issue and that the invoices weren't split in a way that customs required differs from the explanation you previously gave, which is essentially one of the time it took to unload these fully packed containers full of sandwich bars and steel beams and so on. So, are you aware of this issue with the documentation that the Auditor General has referred to?
I am aware that one invoice was provided, but the containers were shipped on different bills of ladings. And in one instance, one set of containers arrived before, so they did not arrive. I'm not a shipping professional, so I would not attempt to state exactly what happened, but I can only give my understanding of it. So when the bills of lading came, my understanding is that some containers came on one shipment that applied to bill of lading A, and the other came on another shipment. And so until...
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but it's for discussion, for the earlier discussion in relation to the bid documents. I was trying to follow exactly what was being said in terms of the bid documents being submitted to the logistics company one. What I have in front of me and what the report would have been based off are bid documents prepared by CMU that would have been sent to the other four bidders. We did note that it is logistics company one that provided the response, but what we have are the documents prepared by CMU. It was my understanding that it was CMU, and in fact signed by a staff member of CMU, who I believe would provide support to that very unit. So it was my understanding that it was CMU that had actually submitted these documents directly to the supplier, or the bidder rather, sorry. And I suspect a discussion took place subsequent to that submission with the fifth bidder. So I think there needs to be some
ensure that the logistics company was in fact a sourcing company. You went through that bidding process, but it does seem such an elaborate scheme to dress up as a bidding process when in fact it was direct contract.
The same prompt item, the a total of 46.7 million was paid to 15 launch suppliers over a 12-month period under the Technology Advancement Program and Career Advancement Youth Employment Solution, the CAPIAS programs. 9 of the 15 launch providers exceeded the allowable threshold of 1.5. Our member advises us it's 2 million, so that could be corrected. If he is correct, it would be 8 of the 15 launch providers exceeded the allowable threshold.
Of this, and we need to get to the bottom of this. Member Warmington is insisting that it's 2 million, and that applies to general procurement, not just works, right? But
Right.
you have, yes, so Miss Hope.
Right, but, oh,
Right. I think it's important, the date is important of the transaction. So 2016, as at 2016, it was 1.5 million for goods, consulting services, and 2 million for the procurement of works. Those were the limits as at that date. It has changed subsequently with the new law and regulations. Let me just confirm that.
Because the applicable date here was January to December 2018, I believe. So this is page 24 of the report, up at the top, page 24.
Mr. Chairman, would the AG have a copy of the contract between CMU and Logistics Company 1? Did you see that contract? Does a contract exist? Because I wanted to know the square footage of the building, for instance. The classrooms.
this is a follow-up on the launch supplier question.
No, I just have to Are we going to launch supply? No, next week. Sorry.
Yeah, so
Continue with your point while they research the issue of the date.
You know, because it doesn't affect the point I'm asking.
Yeah.
I would, so whether 9 or 8 of the 15 launch suppliers exceeded the allowable threshold for direct contracting based on the procurement guidelines. And now that we have the actual names, it is interesting because apart from the counselor and the driver and the helper, I noticed that, for example, a contract for a Dwayne Williams, there is a Dwayne Williams listed on the voters list in Northwest St. Anne, whose occupation is lifeguard. So he got $680,000 to provide lunches. There is a Jerome Green, whose occupation is listed as student on the voters list of Northwest St. Anne. That student got $3.2 million to procure lunches. So I would be interested to find out how were these the councillor Kim Brown Lawrence got 1.66 million. The driver Devon McQueen got 720,000. But I would be interested to find out how were these suppliers selected? Were they all from Northwest St. Anne? Did this CAPIAS and TAP program, were they conducted exclusively in Northwest St. Anne? Or was this just a slush fund for Northwest St. Anne's then candidate?
Fair comment. Yeah. That's a fair comment. It's as painful as it may be to hear it. Member Daly.
To say, I appreciate the forthrightness and the response from the lady from the CMU who is still a member of staff of the CMU. And I'm going to say, we are going through all of this. The malpractices and breach of trust at the CMU in order to warn public servants that they have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the public purse. And that you can't just do things based off word of mouth and your superior officer saying to you, do this and do that. You're going to be held accountable. And that there are systems in place that the government has established that you have to follow. And any breach of those systems will cause you to be embarrassed and in some cases be prosecuted. You have to protect the public purse. You have to ensure that corporate governance and good governance is practiced. And especially when you are using emergency procurement and select direct contracting. You have to ensure that at all times you are following the rules. Especially in this time of COVID, for example, I'm sure we're going to be coming back here because billions of dollars are being done on emergency procurement basis. And public servants must be warned. They must know that they have their responsibility to ensure that things are done properly. Don't mean delays, because you don't have to delay the process to toe the line and to make sure you abide by the law. And I'm really, yes, and CMU was just on a frolic of their own. They weren't? You don't think so?
Yeah, but all of them are complicit.
Yeah. No, I'm saddened because I'm someone who have a lot of respect for public servants. Yeah? I'm saddened. I had responsibility for public service. And I know they are competent people of integrity in the system. How can people allow themselves to be used in this way? It's sad. And I hope other public servants are taking heed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks for your candidness and your forthrightness.
Members, before we take the adjournment, I think the Auditor General wants to respond to one issue.
Just to clarify the matter with the threshold, so I want to draw your attention to Table 4. So the new circular that would have increased the threshold to $2 million was introduced September 2018. The payment in relation to the 1.5 occurred before the introduction of the new circular. Yes.
So, Chairman,
so it's still.
I want to go back to the
On
thing.
behalf of Member Warmington, I apologize. Member Hand.
No. And they bring the whatever information exists.
We have two requests for the next meeting. One is Member Han is asking for the specifications of the building as reflected in the contract documents for the. So we'll resume next week Tuesday at 10. Thank you. Someone move for the adjournment. Moved by Dr. Guy, seconded by everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.